Yeah, I wasn't, mine was pretty unplanned. I joined Microsoft without knowing anything about IT. And so the good thing about that was I was intensely curious not about IT, but what IT could do. And there was this small CSR program that the company had, which was training people on how to use Word and Excel and PowerPoint and so forth. And I saw the potential in that. I actually was silly enough to go out to these remote places and see what are people doing and and do they go on to use it, or do they quickly forget and revert to the norm. And I saw lots of potential. And so the worldwide head of Windows, Bill Gates, and I, we really sort of nurtured this. There was a lot of funding, and pretty soon, as I said, this became a program called Shiksha, which has now touched 40 million children. Along the way, you go into a place like Kanpur and see, chicken curry workers, this women's self-help group that does chicken work. If they have a computer, they can now download designs from the internet. They can reach customers, and suddenly their incomes are twice what it used to be before there was a PC in their village or their community. We created a program with the army for retiring Jawans. It's very sad because Jawans retire at 40, they go back to their village, they end up with no dignity, many of them end up as security guards and so forth. So the army chief approached us and said, can you do something about it? And we worked with them. We came up with this program and not only gave them computer literacy, but in about 200 hours, gave them functional English and also how to pass interviews. And after that, you get a nice certificate, and you can end up, as working in a retail store or something. And instead of 4,500 rupees, you're making 11,000 rupees, and a job with some dignity. So I said, man, this is really good stuff. And I began to realize that, you should try and business and social impact it should not be so divorced and disconnected. We should find ways to do well by doing good. And by that time, 2010 rolled around, and as I said, CK encouraged me to be more risk-taking, and I decided to leave Microsoft. And this head of Windows and I, we started plotting and doing a couple of things together. So one of them was we started a fund called United Seed Fund, where we make early stage investments in such social businesses, okay, including companies like Madan's and so forth. The other one we did was start another organization, philanthropic organization called Social Venture Partners, which is to gather people not unlike yourselves, city by city by city, and start pooling our philanthropic contributions, and then using real discipline in deciding who to give it to. But money is the small part. How do you then roll up your sleeves and get engaged with these organizations and scaling that up? Madan's also part of that. So it's been a sort of a journey that has progressed slowly over time.
I think it's interesting because today, when we look back, this whole way of thinking has become somewhat well accepted, especially here in India. I think it was almost as if the light went off at the same time. This was where the idea was, I think, most widely accepted, and people got into the ring right away and really started to experiment very enthusiastically. I think it took a little bit more convincing in other parts of the world. But it's not immediately obvious how people engage. I think a big barrier for a lot of people is not a lack of desire to engage, but just not having the skills and knowledge in terms of understanding how to do it effectively. And it takes a fair amount of guts. I know when I came back to India in the 80s, you always were very conscious of this dividing wall between people, and nobody could talk about it and nobody discussed it, but people on both sides were very aware of its existence. And I think it's really broken down quite significantly in the last 10 years. But there's so much more to be done. Maybe in the urban areas, the change is more pronounced. So I guess I would just ask all of you, for somebody who really does want to make a difference and engage with people as different in maybe their experiences, what are really the personal qualities and skills that you need to cultivate in order to be effective?
In the Western context, the word used is empathy, but I think in the Indian context, it's more this respect, because as the divide grows wider between the rich and the poor, and it grows wider. It's not really getting that much better as you would imagine. Even if you look at somebody begging on the street, what do you see? It's the eyes with which you see it. You can either see, a bedraggled woman with a child, or you could see somebody who's wearing amazing craft that she has developed herself. She's a craftswoman, and the respect you can have for that. So it's really an approach. It's the way you look. It's the eyes with which you look. It's really finding the opportunity there, not so much the problem. How can everybody think like your father? How can they? So it's, there aren't too many people like him around influencing people to think like that. So it's just those eyes, it's that respect that is required, I think.
I remember him reminding me once that, even the poorest people aren't desperate. They may ask us for money, but they're not really asking us for advice. So we should listen occasionally.
I come back to the lens analogy. It's about the lens. It's about the lens that you see the rural. And I'll just share a very interesting experiment that I did when I started getting into rural. So I went around to a few of my nieces' schoolmates and classmates and got about 30 of them in a room and said, just write an essay about villages. And interesting, I just gave them 10 minutes, I gave a piece of paper and said, just write an essay. And it was fascinating. 6th standard, 5th standard kids were said, Indian villages are very poor, they don't have any education, they don't want to fend for themselves, they don't work, there's no work, and therefore the government has to support. These are the thoughts that came out. Right? I actually did that across the spectrum. I went to a B school and said, tell me, what will you do if you were the rural development minister? What would you do to the country, to rural India? And again, the aspect of I'll give them more loans, I will extend more subsidies. And the moment I talked about rural, a lot of people said, what are you wasting your time there for? Right? There's a lot that the government is doing, but rural is not growing. And that's why we said we have to change the lens. And we coined this term called rural. And said it's no longer rural, it's an urban plus rural mix. And we actually coined a term called ruralonomics as a new model of rural development, because if you Google rural development, the first 100 sites that you get are all about subsistence, subsidies, agricultural subsidies, loans, so on and so forth. And we said there's a new lens. The new lens, the new rural has talent, has aspirations, which again Professor C.K. Prahalad talks so eloquently about, saying that it's about that human aspiration that gets growth. Has entrepreneurial spirit, which is mistaken for, you're just self-employed. I think there's a strong undercurrent of an entrepreneurial spirit. Of course, technology, we spoke about that. I think when you have more mobile phones than people, when the country is getting this size getting there, the penetration of technology can really help construct a new rural. And we've actually set up centers of ruralonomics at SPGen in Bombay, at SDM in Mysore. We're encouraging students to work more in rural. We had about 150 projects that were given out this year to understand. And each of the individuals who came out and said, I will never see rural in the same way I saw before. So it could be empathy. Bill Drayton of Ashoka has coined a very interesting term called cognitive empathy. It's just not about empathy, but what do you do about it? But I think that's a very critical trait to say, I think I understand and I think I can do something about it, which can bring growth and everybody into the picture at the same time.